welcome to Stockholm. We're at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, at the annual meeting of the Association of Space Explorers. They're here in Stockholm, and we have 4 space explorers seated with us here today. To my left, I have Anna Fisher from the United States. I've got Luca Parmitano from Italy, Anousheh Ansari from the US, and on the end we have Pettit, also from NASA. And all of them have amazing careers as astronauts, as people who have explored space and been pioneers in our journey into the world beyond our own planet. So we have a lot of questions to get through today, and why don't we just start with one that was coming to me as I was speaking with you. What is the question that you're most asked?
Why I want to be an astronaut. Why did I want to be an astronaut?
Yeah. And what do you tell them?
I was about 12 years old, and I listened to Al Shepard's suborbital launch.
Okay.
And I can remember sitting there with all my fellow students. We were at school with a transistor radio, all of us crowded around our PE teacher, and I listened to that launch. And at that moment, I said, I want to do that someday.
Yeah.
But I didn't think it was a realistic goal.
Yeah. Why not?
Because there were no women test pilots, and all the astronauts at that point were the Mercury 7, the test pilots. And so I just hoped that someday maybe things would change, and was lucky enough that things did.
Yeah. What do you think changed? Why do you think it enabled you to become an astronaut eventually?
Well, I think I was at the cusp of society really changing. When I went to medical school, there were very few women in the senior class when I was selected as a freshman. And you could just see in that period of time, from 72 to when I graduated in 76, that the number of women in medicine had changed. And I think it was just that whole era where the doors were opening for women. And I describe it as I felt like I was riding a wave, and I just caught the wave at the right time. And NASA had decided to accept women and went out of their way to recruit women. So I was just very, very fortunate.
Right, and you were one of the first group of women to be recruited to go into space, right?
I was in the first group of women selected by NASA for the space shuttle program. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So reflecting back on your career and the way you were able to make such an amazing career for yourself, what kind of advice would you give to young women, to girls, about what they need to do in school, or how they should approach life?
Well, the number one thing, I mean, not everybody wants to go into space. I mean, I always tell young women to go into STEM field, math, science, technology, engineering. But whatever it is that you want to do, follow your dream and be persistent. I mean, I have colleagues in the space program who applied 7 times before they got selected. I think if I had not been selected the first time, it might not have even occurred to me to apply again. So if you have a dream, follow that dream and don't give up. Mm-hmm. And just work very hard.
So your career follows sort of a change in the way we looked at space. From it started out as swaggering test pilots like John Glenn, and then it became scientists and researchers, and this is for you, Anousheh, it became people who were interested in being part of the experience of being in space, and you funded your own trip to space, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And why did you do that? And I want you to let us know what it was like.
So I, like many people, I had this dream of becoming an astronaut, and was not lucky enough to be born in a country that had a space program or be able to be part of a space program. But nevertheless, I had the dream and I wanted to do it, and I was just determined to find a way to do it, whether it was sweeping the floors or, building my own company. And being able to be in a position to do something about it when I sold my company, that's when we funded the Ansari X Prize to start this whole, process of getting more private companies interested in building missions for private astronauts, for private citizens that want to go to space, but not necessarily maybe build a career out of it, but still want to have the experience. And that has been very successful, and has started a whole chain of events, and a lot of companies now are building vehicles to do suborbital flights and orbital flights. And now there's a great collaboration between government space agencies and private agencies and companies building missions together, building vehicles together, and that has made the future of space for everyone that much more interesting and bigger and more opportunistic.
Now, you're considered a pioneer in what a lot of people call space tourism, but there's something about that term that you take issue with. Why don't you explain what that is?
Well, I always ask them, if someone goes and climbs Mount Everest, do you call them the Everest tourists? You don't, because it's not as easy as just buying a ticket and getting on a plane and going there. You do require to train, especially if you're doing an orbital flight. There's a lot of training and preparation, mental, physical, preparation that's required alongside of knowledge of what you're flying. You're not going to learn how to fly an airplane when you buy your ticket to go on a plane, but when you fly to a space station, you have to train as an astronaut. Of course, the training is about a year for someone who's a space flight participant. But still, it's not as easy as a tourist. When you call it a tourist, I think it just diminishes the level of complexity involved in going through that process. But I love to be called a space explorer.
Yeah, great. Luca, you're a fighter pilot with the Italian Air Force, correct?
I'm a fighter pilot and a test pilot.
Yeah. So in the training, going through that process, it's an incredible amount of training alone just to be what you were before an astronaut. Did it give you an advantage in becoming trained as an astronaut, or could you see that it was there are other ways to prepare for being an astronaut that are perhaps just as effective? Or
I don't think there is any advantage. I think for a pilot, a fighter pilot, test pilot, it's a natural consequence.
Yeah.
However, I don't think it gives you an advantage.
No.
Nowadays, we need all sorts of people to be astronauts, and even more so in the future when our exploration goes beyond low Earth orbit and becomes interplanetary. In the future, we will need many different specializations and people capable of doing a lot more things. Right now, my background certainly helped me in certain ways. My background is very operational, so in a way, it gave me an edge, I believe, in solving problems, dealing with time-critical situations, and I have a background that prepares me for emergencies and making quick decisions in critical situations.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about one of those. You've been on a number of spacewalks. You have quite a bit of experience in these EVAs. And I have two questions. What is it like to step out for the first time into space? And then I wanted to ask you, you had something happen to you while you're doing one of these. Maybe you can tell us also about that.
So I see two questions.
Yes. Two for the price of one.
So the first answer is that when you step out, you have in a way two people stepping out at the same time. The first one is the professional, and it's a person that has been prepared and readied and is studied and focused on the preparation for months, if not years. As an example, before my first EVA, I had spent hundreds, literally, of hours underwater in simulations to be ready to perform those EVAs. So the professional is absolutely ready to perform his task and to deal with any sort of contingencies. But let's not forget that there is always a human inside the spacesuit. And I believe that no matter how many times you perform EVAs, and maybe Don can help me out here. I've only done 2 EVAs. I still consider myself at the beginning of my career. I don't think that there's anything ever that can prepare you for the human experience of stepping out of a spacecraft in a spacesuit and performing, living, operating, and or simply enjoying the sight of the universe through less than a couple of centimeters of plexiglass. And there is nothing that can prepare for that, no matter how many times you've done it. As for the second question, which could could take as long as we want, but I'll try to make it short. I had a contingency situation where my spacesuit actually went into a failure mode. It was a mechanical, irreversible failure where the portable life support system that keeps the astronaut alive inside the spacesuit, instead of venting air inside the helmet, started spraying water. And water and ventilation don't mix well together. And so I had to terminate my EVA early to avoid drowning in space. And that evolved into a series of changes that we did both on an operational side and procedures, but also small modification on the spacesuit. So the good news is that that specific emergency will never happen again. And that is something that we can go back and say that it was a good day when it happened. We also discovered that a failure mode that we didn't think possible. So not only our EVAs right now are safer, but the future designs of EVA suits, they will take that into consideration. So now we have one small advantage in knowledge that we didn't have before. So in that sense also, it was a very good day.
Great. Now, Don, you've spent probably the longest amount of time in space of everyone here. Almost more than 1 year, right?
Yeah, about 370 days, so just a little bit more than a year.
Yeah. So that's a lot of time. Has it changed your? Has it changed you? Has it changed the way you look at the world? Has it changed the way you look at life on Earth and humanity's relationship to our planet?
Well, there are some physiological changes, medical changes that happen when you spend a lot of time in space. You can lose some bone density, you can gain it back, but it comes back in a different location. So how does that affect your bones? We don't know that yet. There are things that happen to the retinas of your eyeballs, and there are things that happen to your immune system and your cardiovascular system, and some of these are temporary, some of them are not. And so there are these physiological changes because you've spent a lot of time in space. And then there's like Luca was talking about, there's a human being that's going in space and coming back, and you have emotions and feelings, and it's like, wow, what an adventure. And to have spent that much time in space and come back and not be changed would mean you have missed out on what the whole human part of this mission was about.
Well said.
Yeah. What is it like when you see your home country from up there, Anna?
Well, the view from space is just absolutely amazing. But I think someone quoted, and I probably won't quote it entirely correctly, but you know, when you first get up there, you look for your country, and then a little later you look for your continent, and then pretty soon you realize you're part of this world, and you start to look at the world differently. I was extremely proud that when I flew, you know, of the feat of building the space shuttle. I mean, it was just an amazing technologic feat, and I felt extremely proud of the United States and all the people that worked on it. But that was very quickly superseded by just realizing this neat planet that we have and that we're all really part of it, and feeling that so much of the conflict that goes on, how senseless it is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it gives you some perspective, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I don't want to steal somebody else's thought, but I was born in Italy, and then from a very young age I moved away from my home in Sicily to study, and then for me living in Italy was coming back to Italy was then coming home, and then I lived in France and Germany, and it was enough to learn in Europe to be, well, I'm home. And so I think that most of us as astronauts dream of the day in the future when somebody's going to enter low Earth orbit and look at our planet and say, I'm home. So I think that one of the perspectives that changes is the concept of who we are as humans and what is our home. And there it is, it's planet Earth, and the only one we have right now.
Yeah, yeah. Anousheh, you're part Iranian. You have Iranian heritage. You're also an American, and these are countries that have had a difficult relationship over time. That must be interesting for you to look down on the Earth from this different position and look at both countries. What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. I was born in Iran and I moved to US when I was about 16 years old, and I have lived there, and now I have two countries. When I started training in Russia, that became my third country because I felt so close to the people there, and everyone who trained me prepared me for this trip of a lifetime. And when I look back at the history of space program, and there was this moment where the astronauts and cosmonauts worked together for the two for the Apollo and the Soyuz docking, and then the docking of the space shuttle with the Mir station. And all these things were done at the time where the political situation was in turmoil and a lot of conflict existed. And today I was sitting and listening to the speakers talk about how the collaboration between the cosmonauts and the astronauts doing research has increased, and there's a lot more collaboration even now. And I was listening to this and thinking back at right now, actually, the conflict on the political side is increasing. And this has always been a catalyst. The astronauts and cosmonauts and the scientists and their work together has always been a catalyst to bring countries closer together, because science speaks a universal language. And I think in the case of Iran and United States, I'm very hopeful that maybe in the future there will be collaboration in space even. And there's a very nascent space program just starting in Iran. And I'm sure there will be a lot of desire for collaboration. And I'm hoping that I will see a day that there will be a joint mission, joint research done together between the two countries, because I know the people of both countries want to have normal relationships, and I'm hoping for that day to happen.
Great. Don, aside from the cooperation between countries, what would you say to someone who asks you, what does it do for us on Earth, what you're working on up in space? How important is the research done in space?
Well, space offers a truly unique environment to learn something that you can't learn on Earth. And take the microgravity environment, the reduction in local gravitational force by a factor of 1 million over what you see here on Earth. And say you look at life forms. Life has evolved on Earth for well over 1 billion years, where temperatures change, pressures change, the pH, the chemical potentials, everything swings all over the map except the magnitude of gravitational force. It's been as if the magnitude of gravity on Earth is, you're in the tenderest of incubators. And now, for the first time in the whole history of life on this planet, we can change the magnitude of the gravitational forces by a factor of 1 million. And try changing, say, temperature by a factor of 1 million, and see how long it takes your nematodes to shrivel up and die. And now we can take creatures from simple organisms to complex creatures like Luca, and the fact that human beings can go into space and actually thrive is an amazing discovery in itself. And then we're finding all these sort of tertiary physiological effects that slowly come about when you've stayed in space for months. And it's a amazing opportunity to learn more about life and human function, much like the transoceanic explorations of the 15th and 16th centuries put people in an environment where they were not used to being in, and then you end up with diseases that we know now have common cures, like scurvy, but that was a big mystery back then. And now we take people and we put them in space, and we have retinal disorders, we have bone decalcification, we've got immune system issues, we've got circulation issues, and we can use this now as a knob to investigate disease-like symptoms in healthy people.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing opportunity to learn about ourselves for life on our planet.
Great.
And I'm only relatively complex.
Okay. Well, we're going to go to the short questions. So, have you ever had speaking of creatures on the planet on the space station, have you ever had to kill a spider? Is there anything up there besides human beings? Have you
Mold.
seen
Mold.
Yeah.
You've had to deal with mold.
mold? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every morning when I had to go and shave, I would see a pretty scary alien. My own face in the reflection.
So you work and live together constantly in this very confined space, and unless you've been in the armed services or toured with a rock band, you probably wouldn't know what that's like. But here they do it, and this is part of their job. So what happens when you get into arguments at work? Does it carry over into to your daily life? How do you resolve conflicts up there? Are there conflicts? Is it anybody?
Being on a shuttle crew, we trained together very intensely for at least a year, maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And it really became like your family.
Yeah.
And you learned on the ground what people were like when they got grumpy, if they were sleepy, and you just really, we felt so privileged that we just all pulled together and cover for each other's weaknesses. My particular crew was very compatible, and so we didn't really have any issues. But when we did, it's really like you almost got a second family.
Yeah. Did you ever think about getting a cat up there or anything like that? Getting
A cat.
A cat?
Yeah.
Well, in the world of research, you can take all kind of creatures. So
Right.
we already send dogs in space and monkeys. So
Yeah, right.
probably a cat would feel most at ease with the low gravitation.
A space station cat, yeah.
There's a guitar up there sometimes.
There is a
that
guitar.
helps, smooth
Okay.
things out.
That's right.
And
Right.
But aside from that,
We all know one astronaut who likes to play that, right? Chris Hadfield. Now, what about, have you ever heard a piece of debris hit the outside of the station? Have you ever heard a noise inside, something smacking into
Never
it?
heard, but I've seen the results. You look out a window and
Yeah.
it's nice and clean, and then you come back and look sometime later, and there's a big pit in the window from a micrometeorite that hit the glass and made a chip in it.
Yeah. Do you hear anything out there? Are there sounds?
Well, I didn't personally hear anything, but another crew, when I was listening to the debrief, said that they were all having dinner one evening, and all of a sudden they heard a sound of something hitting the bulkhead of the shuttle, and they all looked at each other. It turned out, long story short, that it was the KU band antenna was hitting the... But for a moment, there was a moment of sitting there going, we're all here, who could that be?
Just like the branch scraping the window during the storm.
I would say that if you were to hear a sound above all the background noise on the space station,
Yeah, it's space.
you probably have other things to worry about right there and then, because it would have to be pretty loud. The space station, because of to keep alive everybody inside, you have to force the ventilation. Otherwise, you would create pocket of CO2 of what we breathe out. And so, in order to filter that air, we have hundreds, literally, of ventilators keeping the air in motion, which makes a background noise. You forget about it until you wake up at night and you hear it when nothing else is happening. And then you realize that that's the space station breathing and keeping you alive.
Yeah.
And so it is a great sound to have, except that it probably covers a lot of the small noises of the creaking that you would have because of the expansion and retraction due to the excursions in temperature. So
Yeah.
it would have to be a pretty loud noise, a pretty loud bang.
Yeah.
And we don't like surprises.
No. There was a young boy here. He's sitting over here. He had a question about putting on your spacesuit. Does it take longer to put the spacesuit on in space or on the ground?
I think it's actually easier to put it on in space than it is on the ground because it's floating, you're floating. You can just kind of float into your pants and you just wiggle, pull, float, and you're in your spacesuit.
That sounds pretty good.
It's not as easy as in the movie Gravity, though.
No?
Yes.
And we don't wear
looked easy
shorts. We don't wear hot pants.
And when you come out of your spacesuit, you look like some slimy worm that's crawled out from a chrysalis because at least I'm sure that's what some of us look like.
I agree.
What is the innovation in space that you've dealt with that has surprised you the most, or the one that you appreciate the most in your career?
Well, one of the things that I think is really a technological step forward that we're doing on space station that we don't do anywhere on Earth. So we've got a couple of refrigerator-sized machines, and you have a spigot on one machine where you can come up and you can inject hot water into a bag that has freeze-dried coffee, and you can make yourself a bag of coffee. And then the water that goes into that machine comes from another refrigerator-sized machine that's filled with filters and pumps and all kinds of things like that. And the water that comes into that machine comes from another machine that's actually a fractional distillation column. So we have a still on space station that makes really nice pure water. And the feedstock going into this distillation column comes from the toilet.
Yes.
And so this whole suite of machines, the NASA engineers call a regenerative life support system. But I like to call it a coffee machine because this machine has the uncanny ability to take yesterday's coffee and turn it into today's coffee, and we have no machines like that on Earth.
That's excellent.
And this is a technology, we kind of, it has a snicker factor to it, but this is an essential piece of technology for going away from planet Earth, because we think we have water shortages here. And in local places, there's a shortage of potable water, but there's no shortage of the compound H2O on planet Earth. You go away from Earth, and it's a different story. And when we venture away from Earth for long periods of time, we're going to have to figure out how to reuse, recycle, and recover as much of the water as we possibly can. And we're doing the first baby steps of this process on space station right now.
Okay.
Including the coffee.
Yeah, including the coffee.
Yeah, well, I mean, including the coffee.
One other thing that I think it's very exciting is recently they carried the 3D printer on board the space station.
Yeah.
So I
good
think in
idea.
future that would definitely change the way we can, live and work in space, because we don't have to carry everything with us to the space
You can
station. So
make something.
Made in Space has made this 3D printer that's being tested now up there, and already printing tools and pieces and parts. And I think in future we can do food and other stuff, anything we need basically, and it would be revolutionary.
Great.
And if I can add on to that very shortly, the one that excites me the most, it's the one that we haven't found out yet.
Okay.
Because let's not forget that we do hundreds of experiments every 6 months. We're talking in, every 6 months we have new experiments, new technology, new research that's coming out. And as all science, it takes years before we have the results and we can turn them into technology and new science. And then the new science turns into new technology in a virtuous circle. So we are doing a lot of research now. We have a lot of data, which will turn into technology, and that is going to be very exciting. And so that is the one that I'm most of all looking forward to. What we haven't found out yet.
Great. Anna?
Well, there's not one thing that excites me most. I think the thing that I've enjoyed most about the space program in general is the fact that it brings nations together. I mean, I grew up in the era of the Soviet Union and the Cold War, and I think probably one of the memories that means the most to me, including going into space, was having dinner with one of my Russian colleagues in a September full moon night with the Kremlin in the background, and remembering all those tanks and soldiers walking by, and here we are in partnership with them. And that, to me, is the biggest thing that I like about the space program, is that hopefully that when you start getting people working together on something they all believe in, and our Russian colleagues and our Chinese colleagues, they all feel as passionate about space as we do. And when you start getting that uniting, maybe we'll start becoming the world, the one planet that we all envision. To me, that is the thing that I love most about the space program.
That's great. Thank you. I think we've run out of time, actually. This is a 30-minute Q&A. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. You have
Thank
to
you.
get back to
Thank
the
you.
conference, I know. Let's have a big hand for everybody here. It's been a really great time.
Thank you.
And so long. Signing off. All right, thank you so much.